directionally, I just speaking for myself, I can say that I'm still very much aligned towards this mission and believe there's good work that we can do as a community to advance this. In particular, focusing on how we generate evidence that we believe is reliable, and how do we actually make that evidence actionable to promote better health decisions and better care. I would say, relative to other efforts that I'm involved in, I'm proud of the fact that as a community we've stuck with this mission for a while and have tried to use it as a guiding light to direct us. And I'd say, by and large, I think we've done a pretty good effort towards making sure that the work that we're doing is directionally aligned with this. That said, I think that there's definitely areas here where we can improve, and I think, starting the new year with an opportunity to discuss those opportunities of where we can go from where we are to where we want to be is helpful. Now that I see enough new folks on, that I want to restate how we think about achieving this mission. And we've been fundamentally doing this through a series of coordinated collaborations in our community. We collaborate on open community data standards. You heard earlier from Christian talking about the OHDSI vocabulary, which is the foundational element to the OMOP Common Data Model. But we very much expected that to be a live community, a live collaboration to continue to evolve data standards that meet the needs of our community. We're collaborating on open source development. You heard from Craig about the latest releases from Martijn and AIC and Joel on some of the Hades packages, but really having these be standardized tools that we can reproduce best practices as codified solutions is an important aspect of collaboration that we need to continue. We continue to collaborate on methodologic research to try to establish and empirically evaluate scientific best practices. And I think that there's quite an opportunity for continued methods research, particularly as we expand into different use cases, different clinical domains, and the like. And then we collaborate on clinical evidence generation, trying to produce answers to clinical questions that matter. So as Mark had highlighted, Yong's recent paper in the Annals of Internal Medicine is a beautiful example of impactful clinical evidence to make sure that we understand the comparative effectiveness of vaccines in children for the latest round of COVID is a nice demonstration of a clinical study. Now, all of these are collaboration opportunities that want to encourage folks to think about and participate. One of the things we try our best to do is to make sure that those collaborations are also connected within each other. And so last year, we actually put a lot of effort towards trying to make sure that our work groups were coordinating activities so that we didn't end up with a situation where somebody went off and developed tools that were disjoint from the data model or trying to answer clinical questions that couldn't be supported from our tools and whatnot. Now, a lot of people we see in various publications, whatnot, when they talk about OHDSI, they talk about the data network and the collection of data bases that are participating. We do try to facilitate a distributed data network whereby anybody who has access to person-level data can participate in any OHDSI activity. And really that can be done simply by first transforming that source data into the OMOP Common Data Model, and secondly by making sure that OHDSI tools can run against that data source. And Claire and Paul are doing a great job trying to push the OHDSI Evidence Network to formalize this process even further for how we can actually participate in network studies by collaborating in this distributed manner. But ultimately, those OHDSI network studies, however they're being run, basically follow the same exact premise, which is that anybody in the research community who wants to can initiate an OHDSI network study that basically involves writing a protocol that fully specifies an analysis. That analysis is codified, ideally and most efficiently using the OHDSI open source software tools, such that any data partner can opt in to participate in that network study by downloading the code and executing that, whereby the results of that analysis involve sharing aggregate summary statistics without sharing any patient-level data. And then we can collaborate together to interpret the results and disseminate the evidence. Now, this picture is something that George published I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And when I reflect on where our community's at, I'd say that we're doing a good job of establishing data standards. We're doing a good job of developing tools that can analyze data. I think we've done a good job of promoting scientific best practices through empirical investigations, and we're doing a good job of generating evidence. I think we have grown to be the world's largest distributed data network, and we're doing a good job of trying to mature that. And there's a healthy number of network studies that are at various stages. And last year we saw good demonstrations of that during the Sisyphus challenge, where we were able to take some questions and try to drive them to evidence that can be disseminated. And so I feel like as a community, we're making progress on all of these fronts, and still this collaborative mode is something that I would anticipate we're going to continue this year. That said, I think that there's always opportunities for us to look and reflect on the ways we're working and try to figure out how we can even do better. One of the things that I did over the holiday break was read this book by Jim Collins called Good to Great. The analogy, and many of you may have read this book before. This is my first time going through it. For those who are not familiar, what Jim does in this book is he looks at for-profit organizations and he tries to conduct a bit of a social experiment to try to understand what delineates organizations that really had spectacular and sustained success from comparator organizations that were not able to achieve the same success. And what I particularly liked about this quasi-experimental design was taking a bunch of organizations as a target cohort of organizations that were tremendously successful and matching them to a comparator cohort of organizations that basically were matched on industry and size and resources, and then to look forward prospectively to try to identify what are those organizational aspects of those organizations that delineated the great organizations from the good organizations. And I won't belabor all of the points in the book, but some of the things that resonated with me that Jim outlines in the book is he highlights that it really does start with having the right people in place, folks that are on the bus, that are aligned towards a common mission and driving and interested in driving forward in the same direction. And that's an area where I feel like we've as a community, we've got very talented, smart people that are interested in the mission and are here voluntarily to try to contribute to the cause, which I think is tremendously useful. The second thing he spends a lot of time talking about is disciplined thought, and particularly two areas that I'd like to highlight today. One is to confront the brutal facts, and the second is the hedgehog concept, which I'll get into in a second. And then it talks about how these organizations had disciplined action to move forward. And so when confronting the brutal facts, the thing that Jim highlights is many of these organizations needed to be able to look inward to really understand and appreciate where they were at, what they were succeeding at, and where they were not succeeding. And it was only as having that that reflection could they really chart a strategy that would really be delineated in distinction to let them have kind of breakthrough growth. And so with that, I'm going to provide a very brief history story of things that I was reflecting on as reading this, about things we've done in the community, specifically calling out some of the work we've showcased at some of our prior symposiums. So it's exciting and sad to me at the same time that it was already now 6 years ago that we presented Legend, which was our large-scale evidence generation evaluation network of databases. And Mark and Martijn and I were the plenary presenters that year. And we introduced this idea that we could do large-scale effect estimation. And we showed the consequences of that in a few different ways. One of the things we showed was that it's possible to basically define the universe of target comparator sets and potentially perform estimation studies, recognizing fully that just because you could mathematically produce comparison doesn't mean it's valid. And so from this led us to this principle of diagnostics that we've been pushing for a while. We also showed that we could actually scale the evidence generation process, and Martijn highlighted that in the Legend study of hypertension, where we were looking at the comparative safety and effectiveness of first-line hypertensive treatments, that we produced over 1.3 million database estimates, which still to this date is assuredly the largest ever observational study conducted. And we're able to look at the operating characteristics as a result of generating that evidence base. And one of the last things that we presented at that time was that, so now that we've generated an engine for generating all of these results, all we got to do is disseminate it. And we talked about the fact that there was a multitude of paths for disseminating evidence. We could create a web app to show the results. We could write papers. Third parties could have access to this evidence and it could be available. And we kind of left it with, now that we've proven that we can generate reliable evidence, all we got to do is just disseminate it, we'll be fine. And that was 6 years ago. Now, in 2022, picking on Martijn again, he presented the plenary session on objective diagnostics, and he presented this pathway to provably reliable evidence, where we kind of doubled down on the idea that not only can we generate evidence at scale, but we can actually prove that the evidence at scale is trustworthy. And one of the things that he highlighted during that presentation was that the traditional observational study basically involves bespoke definition of a research question, bespoke activity of generating the evidence, then some bespoke activity of interpreting whether or not the results are reliable, and then some bespoke interpreting of the results themselves, followed by dissemination of that evidence, and then hopefully the use of that evidence once it is disseminated. And what Martijn tried to argue was that through Legend hypertension, we were able to standardize the process of both defining the research question and generating evidence, and that through the use of objective diagnostics, we could go even further to standardize the interpretation of study reliability. And in fact, the last slide that Martijn left with was quite simply, all we have to do in the future is now we just need to standardize our interpretation of study results and we'll be fine. So we've now kind of doubled down on this idea that now we can generate evidence, we can prove that it's reliable, and we just need that last little hop for dissemination, and then we're done. Which back in 2022 seemed to me to be a really good call to the community where we need to be. So fast forward to last year's symposium, and Mark put us all on notice. And you can go watch his panel discussion from the symposium. But he said, I think as a community, we've done an amazing job in standardization through a common data model, standardization of tools that will execute this data model, and it makes these types of studies much easier. And then he said, we have objectively failed on the next step, and that's providing standardized tools to allow us to synthesize and then deliver the evidence in a way that's actionable, not only for our community, but across healthcare and in clinical practice in general. And this was part of a big panel. I know many of you were there at the symposium, and so it may have been easy to miss Mark's point, but I wanted to call it out again, because we're now on this multi-year journey, and yet if we want to confront the brutal facts, we now have a community that involves thousands of individuals, all with a shared mission, going all the way back to the mission. We want to improve health, and we want to do that by collaboratively generating evidence, and we want to promote better health decisions and better care. But if the evidence that we generate isn't actually getting to the hands of decision makers, then they cannot make better decisions or make better care, and therefore we cannot improve health. And so I think Mark's call on us is an important one that we need to take stock of. And I'm going to assert personally that I think it's an area that we can actually take direct action at. So before opening up a panel to hear what you guys think, I want to just highlight this other thing that I took away from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. And it was this idea of the hedgehog concept. And this is based on the old adage that a fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows the one big thing. And one of the observations that Jim and his team had about these great organizations was that they were fiercely consistent. I guess there was extreme consistency in the fact that all organizations had extreme focus in something that satisfied three criteria. The first was that it was something that the organization was deeply passionate about. The second was that it was something that they could be the best in the world at. And the third was that it was something that drove their economic engine. And I'm going to talk just briefly about these, and I really want to get input from you all. But where it started actually is, what can you do that they're the best at the world at? What was highlighted in the book was that there are lots of organizations that can make money and can be good and can get through. But there are very few organizations that actually have the capacity and aptitude to actually truly be the best at something. That something doesn't have to be grandiose or big. It can be extremely niche, but the value of being the best and having pride at being the best in something that you're going to do is something that found to be a unique differentiator between great organizations and good organizations. The second thing was, what are we deeply passionate about? And what was fascinating was that all of these organizations, no matter what they were, and this was industries from health insurance to tobacco to there's like one pharmaceutical company to Walgreens, so various organizations, but at the core, people were passionate about the mission and really wanted to drive forward to achieve something. And that something that they were trying to achieve was something that they were willing to move walls to achieve. Then the last part about what drives your economic engine, of course, in this book, they're focusing on for-profit companies and talking about revenues and profits as it relates to the organization. But more generally, what they were talking about was each of these organizations identified that there was a specific metric they could use to define success, and specifically defining success around return on investment. So for every unit of effort, whatever that may be, they were able to very cleanly define what was the success criteria that they had to be able to observe that they were actually maximizing that return on investment. And oftentimes what the book highlights is that oftentimes that actually meant kind of redefining what success was and thinking about success criteria in a different way. So with that said, I reflected a lot over the holiday break about this and thinking about where we are as OHDSI as a community. And we've been doing lots of good stuff, but wondering and challenging myself to think about, like, is it possible and how could we go from good to great? And the one thing that it said at the end of this chapter that talked about the hedgehog concept is the one thing you never want to do is just bring your leadership together and hold a meeting to talk about it and say, so let's just define what we're passionate about, what we can be best at, and what our economic driver is. You don't want to do that because on average, these great organizations take like 4 years to ultimately solidify on what their hedgehog concept is to drive forward. So with that, I'm going to open up a poll everywhere. And I'm going to ask you guys to please tell us, what are we deeply passionate about? Oops, I got to drag it over to the other screen. Ask you guys to go to present. There we go. Oh, we already got somebody already on top of it. If you can go to pollev.com/PatrickRyan800. I'm going to start by asking you guys to share, what are you deeply passionate about? And we already see somebody must jump the gun that I said that we're going to do a poll everywhere and put a couple things in here. So we got reliable evidence, we got impact on patient care, and hope that others will enter in some other ideas too. Science, very good. Collaboration. I'm going to keep on this open for a while because I guess if we're going to become a great organization, it could probably be worthwhile for us to spend at least 45 seconds on it. So take your time to go to pollev.com/PatrickRyan800. You can upvote or downvote ideas that you already see. You can add your own ideas. I do want to capture your thoughts. While people are doing this, if anybody wants to unmute and say something about their passions, I encourage you to do that. Lots of votes for reliable evidence and lots of votes for impact on clinical patient care. Reproducibility, that's a good one. That's getting a lot of votes. Using clinical data that would otherwise be forgotten and forsaken. Very good. Collaboration's getting some votes. Structuring data. Simplified the process of making data available. Open science. Training future scientists. Finding novel uses of existing data. Passionate about reflecting research on improving the healthcare system and impact on public health decisions. Large-scale reliable evidence. Someone's passionate about diagnostic approaches. Passionate about realizing the great promise of a fully realized learning health organization that achieves global improvement in human health. Let that just sit for another 15 seconds. I'm glad that you guys have a lot of deep passions, and at least the ones that are getting lots of votes, I think are still very much aligned to OHDSI's mission. So I feel quite good about that. Still seeing you guys entering stuff, which is wonderful. So that's our first piece. We got to figure out what we're deeply passionate about, and encourage you all to reflect on that. I'm going to switch gears and switch the question here to our second part of that Venn diagram, which is what can we be the best in the world at? So we as OHDSI, we now have 3,700 collaborators around the world. We've got the world's largest distributed data network. We've got open source software that's been installed or downloaded from CRAN more than 500,000 times. We've got a standardized vocabulary that's been downloaded 80,000 times in the last couple of years. We've got clinical researchers from leading academic institutions around the world. We've got most large government organizations and large healthcare technology companies represented in our community. So what can we as OHDSI be the best in the world at? See you guys entering in content. So I'll continue to give you a few minutes to provide input on this. Lots of good answers here. Let's just take a look here. We've got large scale evidence, global network studies, adopted model, generating reliable evidence at scale, large-scale studies, integrating steps needed for reliable evidence, advancing methodology for observational research, patient care, network studies, anti-bespokenness, which is, I don't know if that's a proper term, but I like it. Healthy collaborative community, answering important clinical questions. All right. So it's good to see that there are some things that some of you are voting, you believe that OHDSI can be the best at the world at. And I think actually this idea of really being clear about what you think you can be the best in the world at, I think is actually a helpful principle. I've observed in our community that we've got lots of folks who want to do lots of things, and it's probably not the case that we can be the best in the world at everything that we're trying to do. But if there are some areas that we think we really can be the best in the world at, then using that as a forcing function to drive energy and collaboration can be quite helpful. And so seeing these topics of large scale evidence in global network studies and generating reliable evidence at scale, certainly those are areas where we probably as a community can think about what it would mean for us to be the best in the world and try to drive towards that. All right. I'm going to flip over to the third circle of the Venn diagram. I know this one's quite difficult. Oh, nobody's responded to this one yet. So this one's a little bit more difficult. We, of course, are an open science community. We are not a for-profit company that's trying to make a lot of money. But I think that the idea and the principle behind this still makes sense. as any organization, for us to be successful, we need to be sustainable. And to do that means we have to be able to deliver some sort of return on investment. Now, I'll remind you that we have lots of different types of investments that are going on. You know, all of you are contributing your time and energy to the community. And so presumably there needs to be some justification for your time and energy that you need to see in order for you to be able to continue to participate. Let's also not forget that George is fronting the bill for something that's about $1 million a year as part of the OHDSI Central Coordinating Center. And we are actively seeking sponsorship for the community and welcome and encourage organizations who'd like to contribute to the community to help the OHDSI Central Coordinating Center at Columbia University with that. But for example, very concretely, for George to justify OHDSI's sustained commitment means we have to be able to deliver something for the $1 million investment that is being made, because we have to come up with that $1 million a year, and that's done through contributions from from organizations, us trying to get grants or other type of support. But we can't actually do that if we're not, or we can't do that if we don't believe that there's value in the resource that is coming, that money's actually going to contribute to some sort of return that we believe is legitimate. So with that, what do we see in terms of return on investment? So we see certainly many people are mentioning grants, which can be the motivator for individuals to provide support for their own time and effort, which makes sense. We see free labor. Well, we certainly do have a lot of generous contributions from the community there. See, so some people mentioning network studies and publications, and indeed, you know, publications is a legitimate currency, particularly for our academic collaborators who may see that as the thing that they're trying to produce to justify their time investment. Partnership with industry leaders. I'm happy if anybody wants to buy property for OHDSI, that we can figure out a way to put that in escrow. Maybe that'll be a better place for us to have future OHDSI Symposia event than East Brunswick. Let's see, solve people that are government are already paying for solve but failing. And certainly I think, you know, we've certainly been playing a bit of a role in this space where we're trying to help organizations that may be funding other efforts towards this, but help them in a space otherwise. Reputation, driving fundraising. Creating evidence that's useful in the clinic. We could ask for donations from the members. We have not been doing that, though we have received some generous donations from the community. So thank you for those who have done that. All right. So the reason I want to highlight this one and think about it just briefly is because we do need, if we're going to become if we're going to go from a good organization to a great organization, we do need to find that sweet spot of doing something that we're the best of the world at, doing something that we're passionate about, and doing something that can actually sustain ourselves as an organization. But I see all of that as opportunities for us. So thank you for your input on that. I'm going to go back to the slides here. So I got one more exercise that I'd like for us to do for just a second. And I'm going to ask for those of you, most of you hopefully now with the new version of Microsoft Teams can do this, but I hope you all have access to the chat. And I want you guys to tell me, name a drug, any prescription drug that you want. Name a drug that you think patients deserve reliable evidence about. And just throw it out there. So I already see Christians posted Ozempic. Certainly that's one of the more popular ones there. Oh, we got multiple votes for that. Semaglutide. Okay, everybody loves weight loss. All right, that's good. We got DOACs, we got proton pump inhibitors, we've got statins, we've got CAR T products, we've got all the GLP-1s. Okay, we're going more anti-obesity, beta blockers, lithium. Very good. So we've got hydroxychloroquine, very good. NSAIDs, biologics, cancer treatments. So there's lots of drugs that you guys can all identify there that you think patients deserve reliable evidence about. So that's antibiotics. That's very good. So that's very helpful. Okay. And you can keep George says NSAIDs, very good. So we can keep going there. So now I want you to switch gears and continue to use the chat here. I want you to name an adverse event that you think patients deserve reliable evidence about. So hearing loss, I see. So any sort of potential effect that could occur as a result of being exposed to a treatment. Hearing loss, gastroparesis, seizures, low blood pressure, Raynaud's, suicidality, renal compromise, lung fibrosis, reduced libido, kidney damage, breast and uterine cancer, fatigue, rhabdomyolysis. Okay, so you guys have identified a whole lot of drugs that patients deserve reliable evidence for, and a whole lot of adverse events that patients deserve reliable evidence for. And so the question I would encourage us to think about only quasi-rhetorically is, do patients deserve to know what is the incidence of an adverse event amongst new users of the drug? Does exposure to the drug cause the adverse event? And what's the probability that I have an adverse event after initiating a drug given my medical history? Because these are the kinds of questions we've been trying to answer within the community, but aren't necessarily there in terms of disseminating that evidence to every person who's facing those situations and needing that reliable evidence. But we're going to see how well we're doing as a community, and we're going to do this the following way. By asking our chat GPT overlords. And I'm going to go up the scroll. What was the first drug that was mentioned? Semaglutide? I think. Let's see. Christian, what did you mention? Ozempic. Yep. Okay. And what's our... Let's see where the adverse events started here. Hearing loss was our first adverse event. So what is the incidence of hearing loss among new users of Ozempic? That's a question we believe everybody deserves reliable evidence for. So what does our chat GPT overlord say about that? Well, I don't know if it's going to generate evidence or it's going to look it up on Bing. But it says that there isn't specific information readily available regarding the hearing loss in new users of Ozempic. However, it's important to note that a study conducted by Sentinel involved monitoring various non-pregnancy and non-cancer outcomes, including hearing loss, amongst new users of Ozempic as compared to users of another medication, sitagliptin. And this study was conducted to identify any potential safety signals or risks associated with Ozempic use. And they provide us a little bit of a link. Okay, so our friends at the FDA Sentinel have provided a link that is accessible through ChatGPT that says that they're looking at semaglutide, but we don't have information about hearing loss. Okay, so the next question we want to know is, does Ozempic cause hearing loss? Because that's the question that we want to know as a causal effect. Let's see if it's found a solution to that. It says, as of my last update, there isn't specific evidence indicating that Ozempic directly causes hearing loss, but some studies may monitor side effects. And if you're concerned, it's always best to consult your doctor, who's going to then use ChatGPT to find out that there's no evidence. All right. And so what is the probability that I will get hearing loss after exposure to Ozempic, given that I'm a 44-year-old male with obesity and no other medical issues? Disclosing too much. Let's see if I can get a probability for myself. But it says that determining a specific probability of experiencing hearing loss after using Ozempic is complex and cannot be accurately provided without comprehensive clinical data. So Currently, OHDSI has not necessarily provided this evidence in a way that actually is getting into the hands of ChatGPT, nor do we necessarily have actually produced the evidence for this. But the point that I'm trying to make, which hopefully was quite clear, is any person out there could be asking any question about any exposure and any outcome and deserve to get evidence. And yet, no matter what question you're going to pick out, you're probably going to find you're going to be disappointed with the current state of evidence that is out there. Now, this is despite the fact that I would actually assert, going back to what many of you voted is the thing that we could be the best of the world at, is that large-scale analysis, we've made good progress on generating evidence. George is leading our how often effort, and we saw progress towards thinking about the incidence of exposures and outcomes at scale. We've previously seen at symposium that we've looked at every possible drug compared to every other possible drug to offer up recommendations for comparators and studies. At last year's OHDSI symposium, you saw Jenna present about what'll happen to me, whereby we actually have the predicted probability for a very large set of problems. And as Martine had presented the LEGEND results, we now have the results of LEGEND for both hypertension and type 2 diabetes readily accessible on our website. The other thing that happened back in 2018 that many of you may not, or some of you may not remember, was that we didn't only just produce a result set. Martine and Mark also highlighted Legend Med Central, which at the time was a bit of a gimmick, but it was an important, let me drag it over here. It was an important point of fact to demonstrate that while one can generate evidence at scale, one could also try to figure out novel ways to disseminate that evidence by allowing any user to say whatever drug that they wanted against whatever comparison they may be considering for whatever outcome they might be interested in. And they could actually say, what is the current evidence? And not just get a whole bunch of graphs and figures, but actually see the kind of thing that one might expect to see reasonably in a publication. And that's because it was possible 6 years ago through the work that Martine and Mark showcased to actually have, where are you going? There we go. Oops, going to generate a PDF that we could actually develop standardized processes for generating publications themselves and making evidence available at scale through multiple modalities. And this website has been out there for 6 years now. And still to this day, I don't need that, still to this day works in automatically generating publications that will look like something you would see in any peer-reviewed journal and provide you the kind of output you should expect to demand in terms of the appropriate diagnostics and summary of an effect estimate to be able to understand a given study. So in light of that, the fact that we are now multiple years forward and still don't have the evidence of the clinicians makes me think that 2024 should be the year of us focusing on evidence dissemination. I think there's a bunch of different opportunities, and I opened it up to folks to share their own thoughts. But one of the things that we currently have is that we've got tremendous standardized tools, but we haven't yet finalized how we actually get from results in a database into an object that somebody can readily consume. We made progress towards standardizing how we generate protocols. We need to be continuing to evolve how we think about graphs and figures. And ultimately, as long as publication is one dissemination stream, then we need to think about how to produce publications and take that last mile much more efficiently than we're doing today. It's actually one of the things we've noticed with all of our OHDSI study-a-thons is that we can get to an answer quickly, but that journey from an answer to a publication is still a journey that I would say we're not the best at the world at. If anything, we're the same as others, if not potentially a little bit more challenged by the fact that we have this distributed network approach that we have to find a way to communicate. I also think that we need to think about developing and testing alternative dissemination mechanisms. With the work that George is talking about for how often, Chris has been running some analyses, and we have something of the order of magnitude of 1 billion summary statistics. That's not going to be something that's going to fit nicely on a single page of a PDF document. So we've got to come up with completely novel ways to represent that information. But more than anything, I think that the task that I'd like to push on us as a community is we've been doing some good informatics, we've been doing some good data standards, we've been doing some good tool development. But if we're going to realize the mission of our community, we need to get into disseminating more evidence. And so I'd really like to assert that as a statement for where we should be going. With that, I want to encourage all of you to think about how you can participate in all of the work groups and thank our continued work group leaders. I'm going to suggest again that our work groups need to set up their own objectives and key results by the end of this month. And that, as you saw from Craig, each of the work groups will be presenting those key results in February. And so I hope this provides a little bit of fodder for you all as you're thinking about setting the goals for your work groups. I'll also just highlight, I actually took, I went to my Columbia website to grab all the clinical subspecialties that we have at New York Presbyterian Hospital where George and I sit. And I was trying to map where are we at in OHDSI versus where's the rest of the hospital at that George and I sit at. And one of the things that I noticed is that across all those clinical subspecialties, we have a handful of work groups that are focused in those clinical areas and a whole range of clinical areas where we don't have work groups. And that's despite the fact that we have clinical experts across our community in various areas, including, we've got our own Harlan Krumholtz is editor-in-chief of JACC, and we've got Lisa Schilling, who's published a paper in dermatology, and we've got Judy Rakusin is focused on hepatology at the FDA. We've got, we've done a wide range of work in COVID. Michael Bathini's published dozens of papers in kidney disease. Nigam Shah's published groundbreaking prediction models in palliative care. Danny has led study-a-thons in rheumatology. And yet we don't have a dedicated focus on disseminating evidence in the hands of all of these clinical areas. And so for those that are looking for a new place to make contributions and lead, I encourage you to think about any of the areas that you're seeing as gaps, not as things that OHDSI doesn't do, but instead as a thing you could do within OHDSI to drive us forward to disseminate evidence in those spaces. The last thing I'm just going to highlight, and then I'll shut up, is that we already now have the dates for 3 open community events. The OHDSI Europe Symposium will be held in Rotterdam on June 1st through 3rd. OHDSI Global is going to be held in New Brunswick, October 22nd through 24th at a different hotel, which will be a much, hopefully a good experience for everybody this year. And OHDSI APAC will be held in Singapore, December 6th through 9th. So there's 3 really good in-person opportunities, but I encourage all of you to think about how we can create other collaborative activities virtually or in hybrid opportunities throughout the year to try to drive forward objectives that we have. And so I'm going to open up one last poll everywhere and also open the floor for folks to talk about, to share their own thoughts and opinions. The poll everywhere that I'm going to open here is just to ask you, what collaboration opportunities should we pursue in 2024 together? And if you've got any thoughts about things you'd like to see us do, I encourage you to post them there. We'll certainly be using that to guide opportunities moving forward. But with that, we have a few minutes. So if you want to raise your hand and share any thoughts about 2024 that you'd like to drive or any comments, reflections that you have, welcome the input.
Andrew, go ahead.
Wordsmithing suggestion for the mission to change it from generating evidence to generate and use. And I think that usability will focus on trustworthiness of the evidence that gets generated in the way the community already is. But I think it's in tension with scaling, Patrick. And I wonder if you agree. I think scale, it's already complex to try and assess whether outcomes are adequately captured or properly attributed to exposures for single exposure outcome pairs, and doing it across lots of them is that much harder. And so the question of trust and the willingness to use evidence is affected by that. And so I guess one suggestion is to focus more on trust and less on scaling. to really nail the trust part to the point where it's unambiguously trustworthy in ways that are, irrefutable, and then scale.
Very good. Thank you, Andrew, for the input.
Kristen.
Hey guys, long time. I think that focus on patients is right on. As someone who has been more of a medical statistic than generating medical statistics in the last year, I'm really excited to see how we can have the both and there. We're all a medical statistic somehow. So we should think about how evidence applies to the human element. And I love seeing that, guys.